Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Alyssa Watson.
And I'm Dr. Beth Molleson.
Thanks so much for joining us in the Veterinary Breakroom. In the Vet Breakroom, Dr. Beth and I have short conversations where we chat informally about a whole bunch of different topics in veterinary medicine. And today we are actually going to be talking a little bit about wellness plans in the clinic. I'm kind of excited to have this conversation. Lots of times Dr. Beth and I agree on many of our topics, and this is something where we actually have slightly different opinions about how we feel about wellness plans, how well we think they work in the clinical setting, and how advantageous they are for our patients. And so I'm really excited to hear her perspective on these types of things. Dr. Beth, you use wellness plans all the time, right?
Yes, exactly. I was going to say, I'm curious to hear from you too, Alyssa, what your background has been. But yes, I have worked at the same practice for the last 12 years. It is a corporate practice that has care plans. And so I will admit that is all I'm familiar with. But I have found them to be very advantageous for a lot of reasons, which we will get into. Of course, there are some cons. We can talk about those too. But Alyssa, what's your experience? Have you dealt with care plans in your career?
I actually have. So I have dealt with a couple different kinds of care plans. I did a very short stint with a corporate practice under a year that used them, but a few of my private practices have kind of dabbled in them over the years. And that may be why I have a little bit of a different perspective than you do, because they've kind of brought this corporate model that I think can work very well. I believe in these plans, and I think that there is definitely benefit, and I want them to work so badly. But then there are, in implementing those, especially in a smaller clinic that maybe only has a couple doctors, I find that there are hiccups. And so that's kind of what we're excited to explore today. So Dr. Beth, can you, like, when somebody says wellness plan, or you just said care plan, what do you think of?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I like to describe them. I've got my spiel of 12 years now. Let's see if I can remember it. Especially when I talk to my clients, I like to describe them as a preventive care package. So basically, as I say, it includes everything you know you're going to need for the year. Things that you may not know are generally not included. Of course, it does get a little tricky with like preventatives and things. We can build those into our wellness plans. But that's how I describe them to the client. And then, I'm always hesitant to use the words like monthly payment right away. I feel like those are loaded words for pet owners, or obviously got to steer so far away from the word insurance and things like that. So I try to make it as descriptive as possible up front and kind of explain what it includes really just in that first touch point when we first bring it up. So
And
yes, I'll
when
dive
is
into some
that?
of the reasons. No, go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh no, I
Yeah,
was going
so
to say, when
I
do
will.
you first bring it up?
Yeah, and I do think that is part of what you have to be careful about. So in our practice, what we do is we do generally only bring them up if a patient is healthy. So oftentimes that is when, of course, it's a puppy visit or a new adoption, and we try to have everybody on the team mention the care plans. So a lot of times the communication does start with the support staff or the veterinary technicians. But I always like to go in and really explain it from my perspective too, because I do feel like, our clients always value what we think. And I feel like a lot of clients don't like to make any decisions until they've talked to the doctor. So try to be cognizant of that. So that's usually when we bring it up, is when we first kind of meet the pet, have a general idea that it's well enough to be focused on preventive care. I do find that sometimes that conversation, I don't like to bring up that conversation when a pet's sick, because I do feel like that really muddies the waters of like, hey, you're really worried about your pet, but I'm going to explain this somewhat complicated, financially loaded, situation to you. So I do try to avoid that conversation.
Yeah. I think that is one of the places where I have struggled with these plans in a small private practice setting,
Mm-hmm.
is that there are oftentimes we have had communication breakdown and issues with some of the support staff if we have an animal that comes in that is not well. And
Sure.
some of these plans have diagnostics that would be useful for
Yep.
that animal. Where do you draw that line of, are they allowed to sign up for a plan? Who brings it up? Because it's very hard to backtrack once that is out,
Yep.
kind of out of the bag, and the client knows that these plans are available and that some of the things that you're recommending could potentially then be included in them. So that is
And
one of the points that I find frustration with these plans.
mhm. No, I totally see that. And I do think that's why I feel like it is so tempting when that pet comes in, needs a lot of diagnostics. Some of those diagnostics are on those, preventive care plans, maybe more meant to be wellness diagnostics, but could potentially be used as sick pet diagnostics. And there are many times where we've gone down that path, and it does, I feel like, sometimes wind up backfiring, either because then those diagnostics aren't available for wellness use later in the year, or because the pet, heaven forbid, dies or things like that shortly after signing up for the care plan. And yeah, tell me about that article you found, Alyssa. I saw that article you linked that kind of got into that a little bit.
Oh, yes. So I did find, and I've seen numerous, news stories in the past. This one was concerning a large corporation where someone unfortunately had signed their pet up for a wellness plan, and shortly after, the pet was elderly. It was something like 15-year-old dog, and shortly after had passed away, and they were not clear about, the what happens when an animal, on a plan passes away, and the fact that they would have to continue to pay for that plan because those services had already been used. And so that's another place where I think, and then of course, tailing that one-sided story to the media then ran with
Right.
that.
Of course.
But that's really hard. I mean, that's because that's what we're
Hmm.
doing. We're taking this package, of, like you said, services, preventive care services and things like that. And oftentimes, if they do all of those things right away, we do, all the wellness blood work, x-rays if they're on them. Sometimes they'll include things like ear cytologies,
Sure.
there's all sorts of different things that could potentially be a large sum of money, and a large sum of money that the practice has to pay out, when you're talking about lab fees and things like that. And then the client is not paying for those, then, for, they're splitting that up, basically financing it with no, interest charge over the next several months to a year. And so if they've used those services, but then something happens to the pet, how do you recoup the money for that? Or how do you explain to people the value of that and why they have to keep paying?
Right. It is. It's a delicate conversation because I know where I work, you can, if your pet passes away, you can cancel your wellness plan and pay for, like you were saying, pay for the services you've already used. But sometimes that's a huge amount if you're doing all of those services up front. And then sometimes it makes more financial sense to just pay the rest of the monthly payments. So, when it comes to wellness plans, I feel like as a vet, I love them. But part of that is because I feel like I don't often have to get too involved in some of that communication that you're talking about. It's almost like when things go wrong from a customer service perspective, I do agree. The support staff, obviously the vets sometimes too, are stuck having really tricky conversations. But I feel like, to me, I have seen, the thing I really love about it is I feel like, one, it takes the guesswork out for pet owners. So, I mean, those pet owners that show up, they have a puppy or a new dog. They've never had a dog before. They really don't know what, what they're supposed to be doing, how often they're supposed to be coming. And I feel like the wellness plan makes it harder for them to kind of get lost in the process of all of the preventive care that their pet needs. And then I also think it really keeps pet owners from kind of piecemeal choosing what they want to do. I mean, we certainly do have pets that are not on a care plan, and they'll argue with you over a fecal test, or they'll decline dewormings, or they'll try to do blood work every other year. They'll wait till their pets teeth are rotting out of their head before they'll consider a dental cleaning. So to me, it's almost like it reduces the amount that I have to communicate with the pet owner, because it's almost like we have that long conversation up front when the pet is first acquired, and then it sets us on a good path for the rest of that pet's life. And then I would say number two, the reason I really love it is because so many of the plans include that dental cleaning. And I just feel like we get so much better results when it comes to pet dental health when we can do those dental cleanings early. So personally, those are two of the big benefits I see. But yeah, certainly, what you just mentioned, all the communication, if a pet passes away, if a pet owner doesn't understand it, definitely there is room for things to go wrong.
Well, and I think one of the things too about having all that included, and maybe again where our experiences are might be a little bit different, because in a large corporate setting, I think there's a lot more automated ways to know what an animal
Sure.
needs, what they're due for. I find a lot of time there'll be something like, I've had multiple experiences where unfortunately someone's come in, we've done an exam, we've done that, they walk out the door, and so then the next day, or I'm writing up the record and I look up and I find out, oh my gosh, they were due for this vaccine and their plan's going to expire, and now we've got to call them and get them back in,
Sure.
or they were due for, they have this available service. And that's another place where I sometimes feel I'm like, okay, does the dog or cat really need this service, or am I just using it because it's available on the plan? And so
Sure.
that's something that I think, having a very detailed conversation with your staff, making plans customized to your practice and what you feel truly are essential preventive services is where a lot of that comes into play. But then I don't want to feel like I'm practicing cookie cutter medicine either, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I like your point about the large corporations. I do feel like having that infrastructure in place, it's not me
Mm-hmm.
and our two staff members navigating like those customer service complaints. There's corporate people that can handle that. So I could see where in a smaller private practice, like having to walk through all of those complaints or concerns, or when things go wrong, I could see how just one of those issues could really derail the entire day. So I definitely see your point there. And yeah, like you said, sometimes you do feel like, oh, the pet has an ear swab on this plan. Do I do it? Does the pet need it? Do I do it? Am I doing diagnostics that
Right.
they don't need? Or I know we've had situations where, like, the pet's set to come in for a dental cleaning, and then, heaven forbid, it's like our doctor that's out sick. The dental needs to be rescheduled, but the pet's plan is going to end. Like, there are certainly those one-off factors that can be really disruptive as well. So definitely there are
Another
cons.
place that we have run into issues is things like, with newer recommendations, especially with large and giant breed dogs, to wait to
Mm.
spay and neuter.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're on something like a puppy plan,
Sure.
that's going to expire, but we're telling them, they need to, that medically it's probably better to wait. Or things like, if they do wait until the animal is fully grown, now they're in a higher weight bracket, the medications cost more, the anesthesia costs more, and how do you reconcile that with their plan and this idea that they've had these monthly payments? So then do you have different plans for different sized animals?
Right.
It can be a lot, and I think that you can just keep adding plans and adding plans, in order to try to make them more customizable. But then I think you lose sight of, what they're really meant to do, is streamline and increase preventive care. So it's a
Right.
tough thing. I don't think there's an easy answer.
I don't either. And, one thing we haven't touched on that does truly in the day to day practice become one of the bigger issues is that term insurance. where so many pet owners,
Yes.
whether or not they think it's insurance, it's almost like it deters them from getting insurance, which I don't always think is a good thing. And I mean, I can
Mhm.
see it even in my own life. I'm like, do you want 2 monthly payments for your pet who is, you've got a healthy pet and yet suddenly you're still paying like
Mhm.
$150 a month or whatever the case might be, to have your pet insured, to have their
Sure.
preventive care taken care of. So I do find that sometimes I feel like my pet owners are maybe less likely to consider something like pet insurance because of that. And then, of course, heaven forbid, the pet owner who mistakenly gets confused between a care plan and insurance and comes in with the sick pet and things aren't covered. And you can see how quickly that can go downhill is when they're,
Mhm.
with some sort of communication
Mhm.
breakdown and they assume that this is human health insurance and things are going to be covered. So that, of course, is another big issue too.
And honestly, if that doesn't happen to you frequently, I think that's great. It absolutely happened to me all the time. No
Did it?
matter what I did, I was so careful, like you said,
Yep.
with terminology, never using the word. I never used the word covered because covered makes us think
Yep.
it's only natural for us to think about something that we're familiar with. And in the
Sure.
US, that is insurance. We are
Right.
familiar with insurance. Our clientele is familiar with insurance. They know how insurance works, and so it's natural for you to want to put this into a box with this
Right.
other thing that you're familiar with.
Right.
And so definitely I always stay away from the word covered. I always use the word included,
Mhm.
and I say multiple times, if they're thinking about signing up for a care plan, this is not insurance. And
Right.
even then,
Even then.
I
Yep.
have
Even then.
people that walk out of the room, go up to the front, and say, it's on the insurance.
Right. Right. Of course. And, sometimes I think maybe I'm being cynical, but sometimes it almost just feels like it is one more thing for people to get worked up about. I'm like, do you really believe this is insurance? Or are you just hoping that we will
Oh,
somehow let this slide? I don't know. And
do
I did.
you
Oh,
do
go ahead.
your plans include? Do your plans include like unlimited office visits?
Yes, they do, which I do think has pros and cons. I do try to sell that as a big selling point, and I do think it helps me as a vet too, because
Hmm.
what I've seen happen is I feel like it prevents pet owners from waiting for things to get worse. I mean, we've all seen that, like the ear infection that the owner put vinegar in for like 2 weeks, hoping it would go away. So I always kind of try to describe it as like, this office visit is no longer a barrier to you seeking medical care for your pet. So please utilize that. I do try to spell out, when you come, other services that might be needed will not be included. Um, so to me, I do see that as a pro in general. I will say the one con I have noticed with it is like, especially, I mean, we all remember, and of course, many places are still in this situation, like pandemic times, and anytime you're short staffed, I do have that guilt of when a pet owner on a wellness plan calls. I feeling like I need to get them in that day because I don't want them to have to pay an office visit somewhere else when they have a
Hmm.
preventive care plan with
Right.
us. So that is one con to me where I can no longer in good conscience say like, oh yeah, just please go ahead and seek care elsewhere. Cause then I do feel like I could, if I was the pet owner, I would get frustrated in that situation. But what are your thoughts on that
Yep.
free office visit?
No, I agree. I agree 100%. I like you. I do talk to people about that. I say something like, if you want, you could bring your dog in every single day. Hopefully they realize I'm being a little bit facetious, um, but but yeah, because like you said, it's helpful to me. I would much rather see them and be like, no, everything's fine, go on home, than have them wait until it's
Right.
so bad.
Right.
On the other hand, I feel very strongly that we undervalue our time and education as veterinarians as a whole. And so discounting the exam, or even tangentially, implying that the exam is
Mm-hmm.
not worth something, in my mind is a contradiction. And so I have a
Sure.
hard time reconciling those two things. But I actually fall really more in line with you on the side that I would much rather they come in. And if this is
Sure.
going to get you to come in sooner rather than when your animal is so sick that it's going to be difficult for me to help, then I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I will say to your point, sometimes I feel like too I will have a pet owner who then thinks I can do so much with the physical exam. Their pet will be sick.
Mm-hmm.
They bring their pet in. Maybe they don't have a lot of money to spend that day and they're expecting answers just from the physical exam. So it kind of goes both ways where we don't want to undervalue that physical exam, but at the same time, like oftentimes we need to do more than just the physical exam. So, that can be a challenge too. But yes, different pros and cons for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I've also in practice had a couple practices that have tried kind of like alternatives to wellness plans, things that
Mm-hmm.
still, because the big one of the big pros to the practice is kind of this constant revenue stream and client loyalty,
Sure.
and getting pets in the door. It's helpful to clients, but it's also helpful to the clinic. And so, are there other ways to achieve that besides wellness plans? And one of the things that I've worked at practices that have tried are like these like loyalty programs, which I also think are kind
Mm-hmm.
of cool. So to me, I always kind of think of them like a Sam's Club card, where and some of them have fees, but some of them don't.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you have your little card, and then every time you come in, you get points, either by the number of
Interesting.
how much money you spent or what preventive care things you get. You gotta kind of get points, and then you can redeem
Sure.
those points for things like nail trims and other things that people like, and also lets them feel like they're getting something. So
Yeah.
so that's an interesting alternative, I've always thought.
I would say I do like that. I feel like it would promote loyalty and also make the pet owner feel like they're being rewarded for their loyalty too,
Mm-hmm.
which is good, and,
Mm-hmm.
and keep them coming back. And before I forget to mention too, Alyssa, for any of our listeners who like the data, I did find one study that was done by the National Veterinary Associates, so
Oh
NVA,
yeah.
if anyone is familiar with that group, that did look at some research on their wellness plan program. So they basically started offering a wellness plan to see what would happen. And spoilers that they did decide to stick with it because it did increased visit number on average. So pets on a wellness plan were more likely to come more frequently. Not, I believe, not just than pets that weren't on a wellness plan, but more frequently than that same pet did before the wellness plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it also increased the revenue for the practice. And so potentially there, you could consider that a win-win if the pet's getting seen more, the practice is growing, perhaps the pet, not drawing too many conclusions, is getting better care if they're at the vet more frequently. So I just thought that was interesting. I couldn't find a ton of other data, but just the fact that their pilot program seemed to work for them. But again, like we talked about, a corporate practice that might have more infrastructure in place that might be able to navigate some of those downsides a little bit easier.
Yeah. I also think that, and maybe this might be a good way to kind of wrap up our conversation, but I just think subscriptions in general in today's, economy and today's day and age are kind of the way a lot of things are going.
Hmm.
Everybody understands Netflix, everybody understands, all of these subscription based, the food delivery or your meal planning, all of it, has kind of moved over towards this subscription base. I saw an airline that was charging like a subscription based
Wow.
fee, and then you could fly. Yeah, you could fly anywhere they flew, like
Oh,
unlimited.
that's fascinating.
So Yeah,
Yeah.
so this type of revenue stream, I think is expanding all over, not just
Hmm.
in veterinary medicine, and people are more used to it. And I'm wondering if that might just be a driving factor outside of veterinary medicine that might be at least previewing where we're going in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. And we didn't get into the finances too deeply on this discussion, but thinking of those monthly payments, I do feel like people have gotten used to figuring out how to factor those into their budget, and I think
Hmm.
there's a lot to be said for that. I know we did a podcast episode recently where I believe we cited the statistic for the US average US citizen was that bills over like a surprise bill over $400 was something that most people couldn't come up with. And so
Hmm.
just thinking about it from a financial perspective too, not that a routine vet visit is necessarily a surprise, but just looking at it from that financial aspect of, it can just be hard to drum up those large lump sums of money. So other companies, of course, have gotten on board with that too, with these monthly subscription set costs that people are, working into their budget and how that can be beneficial. So
Hmm.
yeah, it'll be certainly interesting to of course watch the future of veterinary medicine and see if this is a trend that continues to spread in practice.
So, Dr. Beth, it's been a little while since we've talked. Have you had any wins lately that you want to share?
Yeah, I actually do have a win that was pretty easy to think of this week, Alyssa. Sometimes I struggle. And that is that I just got back from AVMA in Denver. So it was a lovely trip. I don't know if anyone's been to AVMA. It's one of those conferences that, of course, changes cities every year. And this year it was in Denver. And it was just delightful. I feel like, I've been to VMX and WVC this year. Those are both great too, but they're so huge. This one just felt smaller, like you weren't walking miles and miles a day. It was just much easier to navigate. We had a lot of great meetings, discussions with people in the industry. We had, so our audience may be interested. Our parent company has been called Brief Media. Brief Media owns both Clinicians Brief and Plums, and we actually just changed our name to Vet Medics. So if anyone sees that branding anywhere, that is still us. But we had a big party launching the new Vet Medics brand. So a nice rooftop party. So anyway, it was nice to escape the everyday summer routine with two small children and go live it up in Denver for a few days. So that, and I am notorious for having bad like travel luck, and I made it there and back with zero travel delays. So all in all, a very big win.
Yay!
What
Excellent.
about,
That's
yes, what about
great.
you, Alyssa? Any big wins since we've chatted last?
I don't have any big professional wins. We had a really nice week last week. Every year, my kids go to surf camp in California, and
Nice.
we this year was kind of yeah, it's really fun. It's really really fun. It's put on by a company that's been doing it in outside of Huntington Beach, I mean, for 20 years, and they're absolutely great. And my kids have gone, like my oldest has been going for a decade. So we know them, we know the owner and several of the instructors that come back every year. And so it's kind of fun. It's like,
Fun.
it's like a big family. Yeah. But my parents had never gone with
Mhm.
us, and seen the kids actually surf, and they recently bought an RV, like a big, A-class drivey RV.
Yes.
And so they decided they were going to go. They actually found a really nice military RV base. My dad is ex-Marine, and they right down 5 miles from the beach where the kids have surf camp is a naval base in Seal Beach, California, and so they were able to stay on the naval base in their RV camp there, and it was so much fun. And so that was my win. I drove the RV. That was my win. I
That
was
is
really stressed to
awesome.
drive it, but it wasn't bad. It handled okay.
That's good. No, I would say that would have been my dream as a child to go to surf camp. So I hope your children are appreciative of how
Mhm.
lucky they are.
They are very
That's
appreciative.
that's
They are
great.
very
I'm glad it
appreciative.
went
I
well.
have very good kids. I'm a
Good.
lucky mom.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. So, Alyssa, lovely to chat with you as always. And to our audience, thank you for listening, and we will catch you again next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Veterinary Breakroom. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including a video version on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review us. You can also listen to or watch our podcast episodes on our website at cliniciansbrief.com/podcasts. Drop us a line at podcasts@briefmedia.com. Veterinary Breakroom is a VetMedics production, produced by Alexis Ussery and co-hosted by Dr. Alyssa Watson and Dr. Beth Molleson.